It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna! Welcome to a brand new edition, episode number 438 of Rico Brogna. We have a very special treat for those that are consuming the Rico Brogna via YouTube. I was shaving, and my electric shaver died in the middle of shaving. So you may notice, if you're watching on YouTube, that I am a half-shaven mess. I've got some patches of hair on my face, and then I've got some areas that don't have any hair. It's kind of a mess because I got off a plane from Florida, not for spring training. That's next week. And I said, man, I need to shave. And little did I know that my electric razor needed a little bit of a charge. So that's like a little present if you're consuming the Rico Brogna on YouTube. But we always appreciate you downloading, subscribing to the Rico Brogna. In fact, before we get started talking Met baseball, we always love interacting with the people. We love you, the people of the Rico Brogna, the diehard New York Met fan or the weird, bizarre Met hater that likes to somehow listen to us, especially when we're in pain. And that is why, in an attempt to interact with you even more, we have a brand new survey that you could take. The link is up on the YouTube screen. The link is also in the podcast, wherever you downloaded it. I think the official link is tinyurl.com/RicoB survey. And if you fill out that survey, it works for a myriad of reasons. Number one, you tell us what you like and what you don't like. And don't say you don't like me, because then I'm dead. Then I got nothing. Then I just go back and I got no Rico Brogna. But then again, you can say you don't like me. That's fine. I say a lot of stupid things over the course of a long season. So I deserve that. But if you fill out the survey, you will get 50% off a brand spanking new, it's debuting real soon, Rico Brogna merchandise. So there you go. So if you have an extra minute or two, or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you can check out that link in the description of today's podcast and fill it out. And boom, you can walk around with these really hot Rico Brogna t-shirts, which I'm very excited to wear. We've got an orange version. We got a blue version. Which one's your favorite, Hoff? Are you an orange guy or a blue guy on the new Rico B t-shirts?
I am a blue guy, and I'm very excited for them. I know that you, though, seem to be more of like an orange guy.
Yeah, I go back and forth. I got to admit, I think it depends the mood I'm in. But lately, I've been in a very orange mood. Maybe it's because when I was much younger, my hair, which is now kind of turned brown, used to be very orange. It was a long time ago, but I used to have very bright orange hair. In fact, in the art of Rico Brogna, like the art when you download the podcast, you see a much more orange Evan Roberts.
It is very orange. But that's the thing is, like, on you, it pops well. On me, orange and I just don't mix very well. So not saying that I can't wear orange. I can't wear a lot of it because then I just look like a huge, fat orange ball.
No, I totally get it. But it's up to you. You want orange, you want blue. It's all there for you, so we appreciate it. There's a lot of things we're going to get to here on today's Rico Brogna. We'll read a lot of your emails. We'll talk about the potential injury to Luis Angel Acuna, the injury that we're not really getting real updates on concerning Starling Marte, Kodai Senga, Paul Blackburn's rocky outing. But I want to start with the kids because over the weekend, as the Mets were playing two games that were not televised locally, the Mets were out in the western part of the state of Florida. They made a little bit of a road trip to take on the Tampa Bay Rays and the Boston Red Sox. And while doing so, we got to see some of the youth. Actually, before that, we saw it with Brandon Sproat. But really, over a couple of days, spring training gets to my head. I get confused on what I see. They did have a West Coast trip in the state of Florida on Saturday and Sunday. But on Friday, we saw Brandon Sproat. And watching Sproat pitch and then watching Blade Tidwell pitch, it is a reminder that the Mets have a lot of kind of avenues to succeed in 2025. We've talked about how good this lineup can be, potentially how good this bullpen can be. But if you look back at last year and you look back at other successful years the Mets have had, there's going to have to be a young player or two step up and contribute in a really big way. And as I watched highlights of Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell, and Tidwell gives you the immaculate inning, which is exciting to see, pumping in 98, 99 mile per hour fastballs. I don't know which one it'll be. I guess my guess would be Brandon Sproat, but one of those guys, and dare I say both of them, one of those guys is going to have to be a big contributor to this 2025 rotation. Because when you think back to last year and you try to measure, okay, how did this season a year ago really turn into a success? And there are a lot of things, but one of the big surprises was Mark Vientos. And coming into the start of the season, when you looked at Vientos and you looked at Beatty competing for a third base job, I think we probably would have sat here a year ago and said, hey, one of them's got to click. One of them's got to click. Now, you're going to need other contributions in having a big season, but you need one of the young players that you're thinking about, talking about, to contribute. And more so than anybody offensively, the Mets are equipped to score a lot of runs this season, and they're equipped to be a very good offensive team without potentially getting big help from any of their position player prospects. But when you look at this rotation and you look at the questions in the rotation, it just feels like one of those two guys, and they have other pitching prospects, but it feels like McLean and Tong are just kind of further away. One of those two guys that we saw over the last 3 or 4 days, and they're both relatively close. That's why I put them and talk about them before we talk about McLean or Tong, because they're close. They both got the AAA last year. They're right there. They are a handful of good starts away from being on this major league roster. We saw that last year with Christian Scott. One early return on this administration is they're not afraid to promote a young player. But if the Mets are going to have the success we're dreaming of, one of those guys is going to have to contribute. And you look at the history of this franchise, I'll even include last year's Yankees for this discussion. There's always a guy like that. There's always a young player that has to come up and contribute. I think back to 2015, the 10-year anniversary that we are, not that we're celebrating it, but maybe we should, because the 2015 team was a fun team. It was one of my favorite teams as a Met fan. And when I think back to that season and that success, I'm going to bring up a name that I know causes a lot of Met fans to cringe, but let's be real when talking about 2015. One of the guys that really helped contribute to them winning the National League East, the guy who at the beginning of the season maybe didn't think about being a big factor, was Michael Conforto. It was Michael Conforto. Michael Conforto comes up and was one of the earlier offensive saviors for that bad offensive team. We also got Kelly Johnson and Juan Uribe as saviors, and of course, eventually Yoenis Cespedes. But when Michael Conforto was called up, we looked at his bat as a jolt, and it was. He produced at a pretty good clip after he was called up, and then had some great moments in the postseason, including hitting 2 home runs in a World Series game. So consuming the performances of Tidwell and Sproat over the weekend, I think, was a reminder that while they're not going to be there to start the season, I think at some point, and I don't know when in this calendar it's going to happen, both of those guys are going to be called up to make a difference. Now, I don't want to get nuts about spring training games. I'm not. It's only a handful of innings in a spring training game. But Blade Tidwell is one of those guys, and they're both very similar. Tidwell pitched very well at Double-A. He's promoted to Triple-A and gets absolutely lambasted. And in Tidwell's case, it was a bigger sample size than the sample size of Sproat, who probably was just out of gas by the time he got called up. But you're talking about two pitchers in Tidwell and Sproat who got to that last level, struggled at that last level, and once they give you some contributions for a handful of performances, I think you're looking at them coming up and making major league starts, and I think one of them is going to have to contribute to this rotation in 2025.
So my question to you is, at what point in time, like, you think that it's not going to be right away, which I totally agree with that and understand it too, but like, how many other starters are we going to have to go through? Like, hey, let's give this guy a chance. Let's give this minor leaguer, like, who was it? Jose Urena? Who was that? The guy
Jose Urena. Yeah, they brought him in, the former Marlin and Texas Ranger. Yes.
They just brought him in. Like, how many times do we have to go through? Like, Julio Teheran last year got one start, and then we were like, all right, see ya. It's not worth the time. How many, different starters will we have to see before we actually get the Sproat, the Tidwell.
I'm going to follow the lessons of last year. That's what I'm going to do because David Stearns has only been here for 1 year. So I can't use any other time in Met history as an example. I can only use David Stearns' time. Christian Scott was 24 years old, 25 years old. He was a big prospect, right? Coming out of college, drafted in 2021, I think it was, 2022. And last year, he began the year at AAA Syracuse. And that was his first experience at Syracuse because Scott got promoted to AA by the end of the 2023 season. So it's a little bit different, but sort of the same. I think the difference is Scott didn't really have failures the way the other guys did. You know, Tidwell and Sproat got called up to AAA and both struggled. Tidwell for a bigger sample size, Sproat for just a handful of starts. Christian Scott never got to AAA before last year began. He was starting the year at AAA after showing that he could conquer single A and conquer AA. He gets up to AAA and he makes 9 starts. And in those 9 starts, he was damn good. And the Mets, out of nowhere, because we weren't calling for it, said, he's ready. He's ready. They didn't do it in April when Julio Teheran was forced to make a start because they didn't think he was ready. So remember, Hoff, this is not about how many guys need to go down or if we like Griffin Canning. This is about, is that guy ready? And so based on the fact that it took 9 starts, the first 9 starts of AAA experience for Christian Scott, I'm going to say that number is a little bit less with both of these guys. I'm going to say it's 5 or 6 good starts. So I think the answer to that question, forget about injuries, forget about the Met needs, because I don't think this is about Met needs. I think this is about when they deem these young guys ready. And I think it's really only a handful of starts. That's why I think May 1st is not unreasonable. If both guys take your pick, go out and pitch well in Syracuse, then based on the way they handled Christian Scott, I think we see them sooner than later.
All right, well, then that just goes with another question. Who pitches first? Sproat, Tidwell, or Sean Manaea? I mean, seriously.
Well, I think the Manaea thing, we need updates, right? Once they start saying, all right, he's all healed up, he's going to start throwing, that's at least a positive sign. You can always have a setback, but it's a positive sign of, all right, the clock begins. I'm going to guess Sean Manaea. I'm going to err on the side of this injury is not as serious as maybe we fear. It's not an arm injury. It's not an elbow injury. It's, an injury that we've kind of grown accustomed to. So I think it's Manaea first. But again, forget about the other options for a second, because it's not about that. It's about when they're ready. Brandon Sproat is a top prospect. Let's say the opposite, because right now there's a very negative feeling of, well, Montas is hurt, Manaea is hurt, Paul Blackburn just had a crappy spring training outing, which I'm not worried about, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. Let's say everything's going great with the pitching. Everybody's healthy. Sanga's out there making starts every 6 days. Manaea's on his way. Everything's great. But Brandon Sproat is dominating at AAA. They're going to call him up. That's the lesson I had from the handling of Christian Scott last year. Like, they're going to call him up. So even if things are going well, I don't think the Mets are going to necessarily hesitate to call up a young player when they deem that they're ready. Now, Tidwell struggled for a much bigger sample size last year. And here's the thing about him. We haven't seen enough of these guys. So, I'm judging it based on their performances from last year, what I read about them. But then what I've learned over the years as a Met fan is what I read about prospects usually means nothing, because I can't tell you how many times they've been dead wrong. But I do think that once both of those guys, and hopefully they have it right away, have success at AAA, they're going to get called up. And they're going to get an opportunity to contribute at this level. And I think that's going to be one of the keys going into 2025, how many quality starts can they get out of their young pitching? And that's not just for 2026 when they look at free agency and other starting pitchers. It's this season. What can they do? And boy, Blade Tidwell, for a very small sample size, looked damn impressive. And I love this as a Met fan. We're going down to spring training in about a week. We're going to go to back-to-back spring training games. We're doing a big podcast from Das Beer Garden in Jupiter, Florida. And I am hoping, I'm counting the days that we get to see Tidwell or Sproat. I'm hoping that we do. Actually, I was doing the math. And for those that are going to be at spring training, because I got a lot of messages from people who are like, yeah, I'm going to be down there. What's going on? March 8th, Jupiter, Florida. The Mets are playing a game that night at 6:40. We're going to do a live podcast from Das Beer Garden starting at about 4:45. Do about an hour, hour 15, talk a lot of Met baseball, hang out with you, have some drinks. It'll be a great damn time. And then Sunday, they're playing in Port St. Lucie. My math tells me Clay Holmes is going to pitch in St. Lucie. I'm not against that either. I'm interested in seeing Clay Holmes, but I am pumped to potentially see Sproat or Tidwell because I'm telling you, and maybe it's my love of pitching, even though on the last Rico, I'm basically going through how offense really dictates success in 2025, which is true. I stand by that. But there is something fun about seeing good young pitching. And as Met fans, we got a little glimpse of it over the weekend with Sproat on Friday, Tidwell on Saturday. And I'm telling you right now, if the Mets are going to have big success in 2025, one of those guys is going to have to come up and contribute. Last year, Blade Tidwell, who is 23, is going to turn 24 in the middle of June, made 7 appearances in Double-A Binghamton and pitched to a 2.41 ERA, and he struck out 10.6 guys per 9 innings and only walked 2.7. He gets promoted to Triple-A, makes 17 starts, pitches to a 5.93 ERA, in which his strikeout numbers were down. But the big number that was up was walks. He was averaging 5.5 walks per 9 innings. So Tidwell, in the sample size of 17 starts, did not pitch well when he was promoted to Triple-A. Brandon Sproat was shooting through the system, made 5 great starts in Brooklyn to a 1.07 ERA, goes to Double-A, makes 11 starts, pitches to a 2.45 ERA. All the while, he's averaging over 11 strikeouts per 9 innings. Once he gets to Triple-A, last 7 starts of the year, pitches to a 7.5 ERA, and those strikeout numbers, which was at 11 per 9, goes down to 6 per 9. So we'll see if Sproat can make that adjustment as he begins the year at Triple-A. Another starting pitcher to keep an eye on is Paul Blackburn because he's recovering from that weird injury he had last year that knocked him out for the final few weeks of the season and spring training. Paul Blackburn had a very rough inning on Sunday in Fort Myers, Florida. He threw 23 pitches. He got the first guy out and then struggled. He struggled with command. He gave up a couple of hard hit balls. It was a bad performance by Paul Blackburn. And I had this game on while I was down hanging out by the pool because I was down in Florida over the weekend. It had nothing to do with the Mets, but I was hanging out with family. And the game was on Nesson. So I had the baseball package, and I put on the Nesson broadcast, and I'm watching little Mets Red Sox at this weird JetBlue Park, which I find that's one spring training stadium I haven't been to that I really want to go to, where the Red Sox play, because they basically built a replica of Fenway Park. It is a mini Fenway Park with the green monster, with Pesky's pole in the corner. It's a bizarre place to watch, and I'd love to go there. But I'm watching the first few innings of this Mets-Red Sox game, and Paul Blackburn runs into trouble. Brett Beatty made this outstanding defensive play that should not be forgotten. I'm sure if you've looked for highlights from this game, maybe you've seen it. Headlong dive, gets up, makes a great throw to first base. Wonderful play by Brett Beatty. But Paul Blackburn struggles in the first inning, comes out of the game. And in the second inning, they reinsert him into the game. Now, you know me, I'm a geek. I have scored tons of spring training games. I do not remember until recently that being a thing. And I'm not complaining. I'm just observing that you can reinsert a player to get a clean inning after getting into trouble in the previous inning. I think I had this happen last year in spring training, and I may have said the same thing on the Rico, but this was never a thing in 2003. This was never a thing in 1993. There was a time, and I'm not there anymore, where I would score 15 spring training games. I was so excited for a baseball season. I'd put 15, 20 spring training games in there. I'd score it. I'd go to town. And I never remember that being a thing. But for whatever reason, in 2025, it's a thing. Now, what do I think of Paul Blackburn? and his pretty awful performance, because even in that second inning, he pitched a 1-2-3 inning, gave up a lot of hard contact. I know I said this about Adrian Hauser last year, and that turned out to bite me in the ass. Spring training performance in general does not mean much. So when it comes to a starting pitcher, especially a veteran starting pitcher like Paul Blackburn, I'm not looking at performance. I think you look at velocity. If there's a concern on velocity, I think you look at, obviously, health. Health is the most important thing. And you don't want to be too awful. You know what I mean? Like, there are levels of badness that one can have in the spring training where you start to say, what's going on? Like, in the case of Blackburn, this is his second spring training performance. His first one was a scoreless inning. He threw 7 pitches. Great. His second performance, the one I'm describing now, had the rocky first inning, comes out of the game, comes back for a second inning. It's a blowout performance. If every spring training performance is Paul Blackburn throwing batting practice and he's pitching to a 12 ERA, then sure, at the end of March, we have a conversation and say, hey, I'm a little concerned. And vice versa. You know, we've seen so many guys have massive spring trainings. Butch Husky, when I was a kid, Brett Beatty numerous times. And how's that panned out? You don't want to get too nuts about great performances and bad performances when it comes to pitching, especially this staff. Just get out of this healthy. One thing about Paul Blackburn is I think we kind of know what he is. You know, he has a track record. And the track record is not somebody that's going to go out and be a top of the rotation arm, but he's a 31-year-old guy. He's been around forever, and he should pitch to a low to mid 4 ERA. Not telling you that's great, but that is literally what he does every single year. He only made 5 starts for us last year, so we don't have much to base it on. But before that trade, he pitched to a low 4 ERA. In 2023, he pitched to a 4.43 ERA. In 2022, the year he was an all-star, he pitched to a 4.28 ERA. That's who he is. Like, I don't expect him to be a disaster. I expect him to be that. And, you know, when Blackburn pitched for us in 2024, we sort of forget it because it was brief. Like, the Mets made the trade for him, and he makes a handful of starts in August, and that was it. He made 5 starts. 3 of them were very good, and 2 of them were disasters. Hence how you get to a 5.5 ERA. It's not like he sucked the entire time. His first start against the Angels, I remember this one because I didn't score it. It's weird. I remember games maybe even closer when I don't score it. I was driving down to North Carolina, so I listened to the game. It was a West Coast game. And that was the game I was joking off. I was going to score it while I was driving.
Yes.
I was going to voice text myself. I didn't do that.
Not a bad idea, by the way. Not a bad idea.
No, I know. But I remember that game. Blackburn pitched 6 innings, 1 run. And he got the victory, and it was great. And he followed it up in Colorado with 6 innings, 2 runs. Then he had a disaster against the A's, a great performance against the Marlins, and his last start against San Diego was a disaster. And that was it. Paul Blackburn was like a fart in the wind. We barely saw him.
Yeah, well, listen, I know that the ERA was not great last year, the 5 games he pitched, whatever it is, but the one thing that you keep on saying was, like, you know, mid to low 4s. Guess what? Like, that's actually what we want. If he could do that,
yes.
If he could pitch to that means he's giving up like 3 runs every 6 innings. That's fine. With the offense the Mets have this year, that should be enough to get you a win.
I agree. They need average to subpar starting pitching. And if the offense clicks the way we think, it shouldn't be a problem. Speaking of which, on the last edition of Rico, episode 437, we talked a lot about comparing the 24 team to the 25 team. And one thing I think we agreed on, and I hope most people agreed on, is that this offense should score a lot of runs. Well, David in Highbridge, New Jersey, completely disagrees. David writes, the lineup is overrated. Evan and Hoff, I hear a lot of Met fans saying this lineup is very good. Well, yes, in theory, it can be. But in my opinion, there are a lot of question marks. You mentioned Brandon Nimmo hitting cleanup. That's already a problem. He's not a cleanup hitting hitter or a 5-hitter. Also, can Mark Vientos do it again, or does he end up being Ike Davis? Francisco Alvarez hasn't shown he can be a big bat consistently. Jeff McNeil is another one where you don't know what you're getting. And Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor, who knows? At least the DH spot seems like it can be okay. Curious to hear your thoughts. Keep up the good work. Enjoy the podcast. Go ahead, Hawk.
Can I just want to one off of Francisco Alvarez, okay? I'm not sitting here and saying that the guy's going to blow the cover off the ball, but already he's made improvements or changes to his swing this year. Tom Verducci laid it out. I think it was on MLB Network early, maybe this weekend or earlier towards the end of the week. But he basically laid out how Francisco Alvarez was doing too much with his body, too much with his bat. The bat was hanging on the shoulder, all this nonsense. And he's basically cut down his swing. He's worked on his balance. And to me, those were all favorable things that as long as he has the eye for it, he's going to have a much better season.
Yeah, I think that until proven otherwise, though, he is a question. I mean, you gave great reasons to be optimistic. I'm optimistic with Francisco Alvarez, but if the point David wants to make is that Alvarez hasn't proven it yet, you're right. He hasn't. He's been wildly inconsistent. I think Jeff McNeil needs to be viewed upon not as a guy who can win a batting title, but hopefully a guy that can just contribute the way he did in the second half of last year. Where I really disagree with David is the Brandon Nimmo slander, which I know you can get on board with. Brandon Nimmo, I look at 22, 23, and the first half of 2024, and I say that's probably who he is. He had a terrible second half in 2024 that brought all of his numbers down, to which he put together statistically one of the worst years of his career if you're looking at OPS and batting average. If you're looking at home runs and RBIs, it's not. He drove in 90 runs, which was far and away the most RBIs he ever had in any season. But I look at 23, in which he was an 829 OPS player, and I look at 22, in which he was an 800 OPS player, and that's who I think he is. And if I'm right, then I think he's fine as a cleanup hitter. We have to get out of our mind what a cleanup hitter used to be, because what a two-place hitter used to be is vastly different. It used to be a contact, hit the ball to the right side kind of guy. Now it's Juan Soto. So it's very, very different. Where I would disagree with David is that Lindor is a certainty, or at least close to one. Juan Soto is a certainty. Pete Alonso, even in a bad year, feels like a certainty. Vientos, yeah, he's going to have to do it again. He's in a better lineup, and I feel like he's continuing to grow as a hitter. He's working his ass off, so I think he can at least produce similarly to what he did last year. And I think that Brandon Nimmo is more like the 22, 23, first half 24 guy. And if you believe all that, that means the top five hitters in this Met lineup is as good as any top five hitters in baseball. So I feel very good about this lineup, David. Respectfully, I disagree. I think the lineup, especially when you compare it to just about everybody else in baseball, it's right up there. That's the way I look at it. I'm not going to join Francisco Alvarez and say it's the best lineup in baseball, but when you look at some of the better lineups in this sport, I think you could put the Mets right up there. It's certainly a part of the conversation.
No doubt. The only thing is, I mean, like, there's one team that sticks out more than anybody else, the Dodgers.
Sure.
And that's almost impossible to touch right now. But besides that, I am in agreement. I mean, I think this is arguably the best 1, 2, 3 the Mets have ever had.
I think so. All right, a couple of injuries we should address. Number one, Luis Angel Acuna. He was hit in the elbow by a pitch. Shane McClanahan did it over the weekend. It looks like he's going to be okay. So the initial scare with Luis Angel Acuna was, oh, my God, are you kidding me? Looks like he's going to be okay. Stayed in the game, stole a base, then he came out. I think the Mets were being very cautious. They weren't even sending him for an MRI, or I should say for x-rays. So it feels like the Mets escaped in the Luis Angel Acuna situation. Injury update number 2 is A.J. Minter. A.J. Minter is facing live hitters through a bullpen session down in Port St. Lucie, Florida. So that's a good sign. Remember what Mendy said at the beginning of spring training. If Minter can get into 4 or 5 games, basically, I think that was the number he used, he should be ready to make the team and be good to go for opening day. Well, it's March 2nd. He's throwing bullpens. It gives him a few more weeks before he has to get into games. And if he can't get into games, I'll tell you one guy who's looked good so far, Hennessy Cabrera. who is a non-roster invitee, and I think has a real shot to make this team if Minter has to start the year on the IL, but it does look like Minter's trending in the right direction. Kodai Senga. Kodai Senga gives us a lot of nerves, especially now with the Mets a couple of guys down in the rotation. Kodai going to make his first spring training start on Monday, a Monday night televised spring training game. That is my jam right there. In fact, that one I'm going to give thought to scoring. I get my scorebook out, ready to go on a Monday night. That feels like the regular season. I always wonder, this is a weird observation, but maybe you'll hear the broadcast talk about it on Monday or tonight, depending on when you're listening. Why wouldn't you play more nighttime spring training games? Spring training is about getting ready for the start of the season. Well, guess what? 80% of the games are played at night. They're played battling the lights. So why is basically every spring training game played during the day? I have noticed the Mets are mixing in some more night games, including this upcoming week in spring training. But seeing Kodai Senga on the mound, that's important. That's nice to see. Getting him ready for the start of the year. I think he's the leader in the clubhouse now to be the opening day starting pitcher. Though I was crunching the numbers after Mania got hurt, looking at how the Met rotation can be laid out around off days so that Senga can remain with the extra day and the Mets could kind of avoid having to use a sixth starter until they have to. And the way I calculated it was Senga starts on opening day in Houston against the Astros. His next start would come on 5 days rest, the finale of that road trip in Miami against the Marlins. And then his next start would come against the Marlins again on 5 days rest, the second to last game of that homestand against Miami. Then his next start would be in Minnesota on 5 days rest. So the Mets could manipulate the off days and keep Senga with an extra day. They would finally have to add a sixth guy to the rotation based on my math until April 19th. And then Senga's next start would be on Sunday, April 20th, also on 5 days rest. So if they want, and no one else gets hurt, that's the other thing. Can't have any more injuries. The Mets could keep McGill in the minor leagues because I always assumed he's the odd man out because he has options, so it lets you manipulate another roster spot for a bullpen arm. The Mets could keep a 5-man rotation with pretty much everybody getting an extra day. There'd be a handful of days. There would be only one start until the middle of April where a guy would have to pitch on regular rest, and I have that guy being David Peterson. Other than that, basically you can go the first 3 weeks of the season with a 5-man rotation, manipulating the off days, and everybody getting extra rest. So right now, assuming Senga is online to do it, you can have Kodai Senga make that opening day start. And if he starts the second day of the year, that doesn't work because then that guy who pitches the second day of the year, unless you really move things around, would have to pitch on regular rest on Wednesday, April 9th. So I'm helping you out, Mendy, in case you haven't broken down the calendar yet. And the other injury we have to update is Starling Marte, because Marte is still dealing with this knee issue, a knee issue he's been dealing with this entire offseason. And as the days go by, you look at the Caminero trade, Alexander Caminero. How do you pronounce his name again, Holf?
I think it's like Candelario or something like that.
No, it's not Candelario.
You sure?
You know, it's funny, when they first made the trade, I had the pronunciation down completely well. Canario.
There it is. Like a canary.
Yes. It's like a canary. When they made the Alexander Canario trade and you announced it on the Rico, that initial reaction was, they're going to take a look at him for a month. I know he has no options. Maybe they could sneak him back down to AAA. And then your brain starts to say, well, maybe they're trading Starling Marte. Now, I think our brain tells us the guy's hurt. Marte's probably not going to be ready for the start of the season. He has no trade value right now. So Canario probably makes the team and turns out to be the right-handed DH. Tree Frog sent us an email about this subject. Tree Frog writes, Hey guys, was listening to Mendoza talk about Marte having knee soreness still and won't be participating in a Grapefruit League game for at least a fortnight. And it got my brain going. Any chance the Mets know Starling Marte is cooked and we made the trade of Canario to be the right-handed bat in the Winker platoon? They can either start Marte on the 10-day or 60-day IL, freeze a 40-man roster spot, while allowing Starling Marte to still be with the team and be our, quote, vibes dude. So I think that it is certainly possible, and I'd say likely, that the motivation behind the Canario trade may not have been they know they're trading Marte, but more the point that they are deeply concerned about this knee issue. And I've had this vision, this hope maybe, that because Marte is going to be asked to do so much less this season, not have to play the field, be a right-handed DH, that will help keep him healthy. And while I like that thought and I stand by that thought, he needs to be healthy to stay healthy. And right now, this knee issue, in which he has not been able to do anything at spring training, leads you to believe, well, that part-time DH role is not going to help him stay healthy because he can't get healthy. So the Canario trade feels like a backup plan. It feels like, okay, it only cost the Mets some couple of dollars. They didn't give up any capital on him. We bring him in. We give him all of spring training. If Marte's healthy and ready and we don't trade him, all right, thanks. Thank you, Alexander. You were sort of expensive backup policy. And I wouldn't even say that expensive because the Mets traded cash considerations. I'm not sure how big that dollar bill was. But if they either find a partner for Marte or Marte's just not healthy, then Canario makes the team. I think that's clear. I know Ozokar is another option as an outfielder on the 40-man roster, but Canario, based on his ability to play all three outfield positions, based on a little bit of speed, right-handed bat, still relatively young, there's this high upside to him that makes him the perfect replacement for Marte if Marte isn't healthy. So Tree Frog, I think you may be right. Not that they're keeping him around for vibes. I think they're keeping him around because he's not tradable. And, you know, I made this point on the last Rico, and I say this a lot about athletes. I know a guy's overpaid, but paying down their salary just to get rid of them, what does it really do? You know, if the Mets basically went to a team and said, all right, we're going to pay 90% of Marte's salary to make him go away, he can't help you in any way, and you're not saving that much money. You're paying off his money to go away, as opposed to just paying him the money he's owed. And who knows? Maybe we're sitting here in the middle of June and Starling Marte's knee is feeling better and he's contributing for this team. I wouldn't bet on it, but it's certainly possible. But right now, the confidence that I have in Starling Marte being healthy for the start of the year is certainly diminishing. We talked about spring performances a little bit earlier on the pod. Mike in Tulsa writes, guys, I was looking at the box score from the game the other day, and Pete Alonso hit another double. For me, even more than Brett Beatty's performance, what's most impressive is the spring Pete Alonso is having. He's already blasted 3 doubles. If Pete can be a consistent hitting doubles and blasting his 40-ish home runs we expect from him, this will be the best lineup in baseball. So when I watch spring training and you're looking at Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso, I really think the performance means absolutely nothing. Last year in spring training, Pete Alonso was productive. Like he had a good spring training last year, if you look at his numbers. In fact, I'll pull them up for you. 321, 6 doubles, 2 home runs, a 947 OPS. What does it mean? For veteran players, it doesn't mean anything. Francisco Lindor had, meanwhile, an awful spring training. He hit 145 with a 433 OPS. Now, you could argue maybe that didn't help for his April because he also had a bad April, and he got off to a lousy start in May before he turned his season around. But I don't look at the veterans' numbers in spring training as meaning anything, good or bad. So, yes, Pete Alonso's gotten on base a lot to start spring training. He has stroked a few doubles so far to start spring training. I wouldn't read too much into that. Brett Beatty's the other guy I look at, and I also wonder. Now, Beatty has something on the line in that he's trying to make the team. And when you're battling to make the team, you certainly think that your performance in spring training matters. But Brett Beatty had a very good spring training 2 years ago in 2023. We saw what happened then. He ended up back in the minor leagues. He also had a good start to spring training in 2024 and ended up being on the major league roster, being the third baseman, and did everything he could to lose that job. Beatty's performance in the spring matters because right now, as I sit here today, I think he's the favorite to get that last infield spot. I do. I think he's got a real chance to make this team. And I'd give him the edge over Luis Angel Acuna. I'd give him the edge because I think there's more offensive punch from him. I know he doesn't give you the same versatility Acuna doesn't give you the speed, but I think he gives you more potential offensively. And the other reason why Brett Beatty has an edge is if you send Brett Beatty down to AAA, he's got nothing to prove down there. He's already hit down there. He's conquered AAA. He's learned how to play second base. So the position change you wanted him to make, he's already made. And I haven't seen enough of him at second base and enough balls in play yet at second base to tell you if he's any good, but he's learned second base. He's gotten a lot better at third base. We even saw that last year when he struggled offensively. And he's hit at AAA. So he goes down to AAA, it's like he's going on a walking machine. Like, okay, great. Well, what now? At least Acuna needs to conquer AAA. He didn't conquer AAA last year. We forget that because he came up and he contributed. But Acuna can go down there and get more experience at second base, more experience in the outfield. And oh, by the way, put up some big numbers at AAA, something he didn't do last year, and get to play every day. Brett Beatty, at this point in his career, in my opinion, doesn't need to, quote unquote, play every day. Brett Beatty's not a prospect anymore. Brett Beatty just needs to be a major leaguer. So for those reasons, I think I gave a few. I give Brett Beatty the edge at being the last guy on this roster, the 26th man, if you will. And so, yeah, his performance matters because it's tough for Beatty to make this team if he goes out and it's 205. He's off to a great start, but it's still early. You know, you put together an 0 for 12, all those great numbers can go down quickly. The other kind of area where Brett Beatty has a chance to play is playing third base with Vientos getting a DH day or Vientos getting a first base day. So his ability to play third base gives him another avenue to get some at-bats. And we've talked about this a few times. I'm not judging Jeff McNeil's performance in spring training at all, but I am saying that Jeff McNeil's got to hit. Because if he doesn't hit, he's going to lose his job. Chris J writes in the emails, guys, there was a time where Jeff McNeil was a big contributor to this offense. And although he did have a good second half before injury, do you think McNeil has a shorter leash this year, given the rise of Luis Angel Acuna? Well, Chris, I'll say he has a shorter leash, not just because of the rise of Acuna, but I think because of Brett Beatty. And because Jeff McNeil has had numerous bad years in a row where it's no longer fair to just say, well, he won a batting title a couple of years ago. It's a long time ago. So I think McNeil's leash is short because A, he hasn't been good in a couple of years despite his second half. And B, they do have options. You mentioned Acuna. I mentioned Beatty. Maybe at some point later this year, we're talking about a guy like Chet Williams. They have other options to play second base. And that is why I've not mentioned his name yet, but why not do it right now towards the end of this podcast? It is why Jose Iglesias is still not an option. Because, and I don't think it's personal against Iglesias. I think that they see Beatty, they see Acuna, they see some of the other younger guys I mentioned, like Chet Williams and Ronnie Mauricio, as options to play second base, as options to play third base if Vientos had to move. And so Iglesias' value on this team, despite being a wonderful singer and being Candelita, is not as valuable because they've got options. Like right now, if they signed Jose Iglesias, that means Brett Beatty's going to AAA. And I know a lot of people out there don't love Brett Beatty. It's not about me loving Brett Beatty or believing in him. It's about, this is it, man. This is his last shot. And I think his last shot's going to come making this team and getting some at-bats early in the season, because he'll get at-bats. He will. He'll get at-bats on days where Brandon Nimmo is sitting and Jesse Winker's playing the outfield and Beatty's DHing, or Vientos is DHing and Beatty is playing third base. Like, there are going to be a lot of ways for that last infielder, whether it's Beatty or Acuna, to get at-bats, which is why when I hear the names of other infielders that could make this team, I squint my eyes and say, really? Like, is Jared Young making this team and then getting at-bats? I don't think he's getting at-bats. I don't think any of us want to even see them or those guys get at-bats. That's why, to me, it's Acuna and Beatty, because if you are sitting guys, those are the guys that you're going to want to see out there, at least getting some opportunity. Obviously, poor Nick Madrigal is out for the season, as we know, so he's no longer an option. I'm not going to pick on him because, well, he's not making the team, as much as I feel bad. Donovan Walton is another guy who's gotten a lot of mention lately because he could play shortstop. Is Donovan Walton's making the team? If Donovan Walton's making the team, here's what my question is. And I had this early on for Madrigal, but let's use Donovan Walton. Let's pick on him instead. If he makes the team, when's he playing? Is he ever playing? Like, I like having 26 guys on a roster and giving almost everybody a chance at some point to play. Donovan Walton makes the team. What's he doing? When's he playing? Is he just a pinch runner? Is he just a defensive replacement? I also don't know enough about his defense to even say that that's such an upgrade. Beatty is on the team. He will get chances to play and will understand it. Same thing with Acuna. So the other names that you hear in this backup infield job, I just don't fully buy it. But we've got more baseball to watch and more baseball to kind of figure out if anyone else is going to make their name imprinted in our brains as guys that need to make the team. We are going to spring training. So if you're going down to Florida over the weekend, March 8th and 9th, say what's up. We'll be down in Jupiter, Florida on Saturday at Das Beer Garden. We'll be broadcasting live at 4:45 p.m. right up until about 6 o'clock, talking Mets baseball with you at Das Beer Garden in Jupiter, Florida, right before the Mets play a spring training game down at Roger Dean Stadium. And then Sunday afternoon, they're playing another game in Port St. Lucie. We'll be doing a podcast right after that game at PGA National, which we're looking forward to doing. So we got a bunch of Rico Brogna lives coming up over the weekend as we head down to spring training. If you do have a few minutes, we appreciate it. You can fill out our brand new Rico B survey. Things you love, things you hate. And the best part is you get 50% off the Rico t-shirt. The brand new Rico t-shirt that will be on sale soon. You get 50% off just for filling out the survey. So you can check out that link where you download the podcast, or if you're consuming it on YouTube, that link is right there for you.
And there's a bunch of people already who have filled out the survey and have said that they've purchased the shirt. They love it. Established 2022, which, yes, exactly. 2022, June 1st, 2022 was the first ever episode of Rico Brogna. So it feels like we've been doing it forever, but it's not that long.
I know. 2022.
I know.
Feels like 5 minutes ago. Either way, we appreciate it. We got more Rico Brognas coming up this week. And then, of course, we're down at spring training for a special Saturday live broadcast and a Sunday broadcast as well. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for subscribing. I'll be back with Tiki Barber Monday, 2 o'clock on the Fan. Fresh off my little mini fly. I'm going to Florida twice. I went to Florida to see the family, and then me and Pete are going down there. By the way, Hoff, you're going to like this. I am renting a car while we're in spring training. And I told Hoff, I said, look, I'll drive you to the stadium. We'll drive together. We'll do some carpools. The only rule is I drive. I'm a big driver. I got to drive. I decided, since we're going down to Florida, let's do it in style. So I have rented a Ford Mustang convertible.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding you.
I was nervous you were going to go like a little hybrid, a little random, like tiny car.
Back in the day, I have to admit. So when I was single, I ain't single now. I would go on vacation for whatever reason. I'm not a big car guy. Don't care about cars. I drive. It never mattered to me. Just get from one place to another. But when I would go on vacation, I would get convertibles. I don't know why. It'd be like my one moment to be who I'm not, which is someone who gives a rat's ass about cars. So California, I'd get a convertible. Spring training trips I used to do back in the day, convertible. And my wife is coming. And I was like, you know what, baby? We're going to get a convertible. And I was like, I think Hope's going to like it too.
Oh, yeah.
So you may see us with our convertible with the top down, driving through old people's land, Jupiter, Florida.
That's going to be sick. I can't wait. Now, do you know the color yet?
No, I don't think they tell you. When you rent the car, I think it's almost like whatever Ford Mustang convertible is available.
I really hope somehow it's blue and orange. That would be.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they make that, but I would love that.
That would be the topper now, wouldn't it?
Oh, boy.
So we got a lot of fun stuff coming up on Rico Brogna. We appreciate you listening, subscribing, downloading another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.